Hello and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we are going to start object-oriented programming in Python. It is a must-know topic in a Python in any programming language too. So Python is a multi-paradigm programming language. That means it supports a different programming approach. Sometimes it is called as a functional programming language, scripting language, or even object-oriented programming language. One of the popular approaches to solve a programming problem is by creating the objects, which is object-oriented programming. So in this lecture, we are going to talk about object-oriented programming with Python. So any object basically has two characteristics. So everything in this world is an object. Man, animal, or a thing is here an object. So man has basically eyes, man have a nose, man has basically the ears, which is basically he have the color, either a white color or he have a brown color, and he can also have the color of eyes, and basically he can have the body shape, either a fat or either a very much thinner. So that is basically his attribute, which is basically his variables in the case of the functional programming, but we normally call it an attribute in the case of the object oriented programming. So man has an attribute like the color of his hair, color of his basically the eyes, and his height are his attributes, and his functions can be like dancing. He can also think, he can also sing, he can eat, he can just move around. So they are his functions. That is what the thing can do, or what the object can do is his functions, or what we normally call the method in the case of the object oriented programming. So another object you can see here, which is a parrot. So parrot has an attribute and behavior, and his attribute can be name, age, color can be his attribute, and he can sing and he can dance, and they are his just behavior or the functionality. And we have this motorbike here, so it can be the model name, or it's basically the price, and that can be its attribute. And behavior can be like they can ride in the bike, or they can just do multiple tasks with the bike, so that can be the functionality. And we have another thing here, which is mobile. So everybody know the functionality of the mobile, that is its behavior, and you have the attribute, that is its color, its model number, its price, that can be its attribute. So everything in this world is an object. They have an attribute and they have a behavior. That means they have its attribute which is different from one another. That means you have a person and you have another person. His attribute can be the different from this person, which is a Superman. His power can be much greater than the another person. We have something that is a normal people, let's say. So we are just comparing the normal people with this Superman. That means we will just say something that is the man over here has more power than that the normal man. So we have a attribute difference to the normal man, and we have a same behavior. That means we can just sit around, and this Superman can just move around, that the normal person can also move, and the Superman can have also something that is eat, and basically normal people can also eat. So the Superman can also eat and the normal person can also eat. So that is his behavior. And in the case of a parrot, they can have a different attribute, like they're someone that is they have the big eyes, and they have something that is fat, they are fat from one another. That is they have a different attribute, but the singing and dancing, which are the behavior of the parrot, can be the same, which is basically comparison between the two of these parrots. So we can just say the behavior can be the same for each of these objects, but the attribute differs from one to another. In the case of motorbike too, the price between the different motorbike can be different, but the behavior, that is to ride, is same almost in all of these superbikes. So this is to say that all the objects has different attribute, but they have the same behavior, and they must have the common behavior, that must be just a blueprint in the case of class. So you just define the behavior in the class, which is basically the blueprint of this all the object, where you define the attribute and behavior in the class, and you just map each of these object, which is basically the instances of these classes. So we can take the example of this parrot. So parrot has obviously the attribute and the behavior, and attribute is basically the variable in the case of a functions. If you have ever used the functions, and in the previous lecture, so in the previous lecture we have used it multiple times, that is our variable of the function, which was basically the local variable and global variable. It is same as saying that variable, but in the case of object oriented programming we normally call it as attribute. So in the behavior we make use of a word behavior or a method in the case of object oriented programming, rather saying just a method or just functions in the functional programming. So we normally say the behavior instead of a function in object oriented programming, but they do differ in the case of this implementation, that is just creating the object in the case of this object oriented programming, but their functionality are quite similar, that is the functions and the method are same in the behavior, but the way they are called is different. One is called directly with the passing a parameter, like we just normally call a function, but in the case of this method we have to create the instances of the class, and only the method can be called with that object. So let's take deep down into this attribute and behavior of our parrot. So we have a parrot here with an attribute that is name, age and color here. So parrot can have name, age, color as an attribute, and it can also have the behavior that is singing and dancing. So this is the functionality of this parrot, like we have the functionality of riding in the case of a bike and a cars. So this is the functionality of a parrot, and normally we call it as singing and dancing, or basically a behavior, which is the methods of our class. So the concept of object oriented programming in Python focuses primarily on creating a reusable code. So just remember, we make use of a reusability with the help of object-oriented programming. This concept is also known as a don't repeat yourself technique, in which we just don't repeat ourselves the same code. Instead, we just make use of that code again and again, which is in the case also of the functional programming, where we make use of the functions instead of just repeating the same code over and over. So Python concept also provides the following OOP basic principles, and we'll just see all of these in the next upcoming lecture, that is our inheritance, encapsulation and polymorphism. So inheritance is a process of using details from a new class without modifying an existing class. That means you have a parent class and you have a child class. So child basically inherits all the properties, all the attribute, all of this method into that child class. That means you can make use of all of this parent class method in the child class. So that is importance of inheritance, and we'll see that in the next lecture. And we have next properties, that is encapsulation. So encapsulation is important topic in the object oriented programming. Basically it hides the private detail of a class from any other object. That means you can just provide the method in order to just take a reference, or in order to just manipulate the data or attribute of the class. You can't just directly manipulate the data or the attribute of the class using this encapsulation. And the next important characteristics is polymorphism. It is a concept of using the common operation in a different way for a different data input. Basically it provides a different form of using the common operation in a different way in the Python. So we'll just use all of these concepts in upcoming lecture to make our code more robust and more stylish and more reusable. So in this lecture we are just going through some basics of object oriented programming, like creating the class and just creating a parrot class. Basically we have seen the parrot has attribute and behavior over here. So we'll just implement this object and the class in this lecture. So basically we want to just create a new script, which would be our object oriented programming script. And let me just take you to the code now. So here all you need to do is simply open this object-oriented programming Python file, and basically you need to just create this new script. And first of all we have to just create the class. So class is a blueprint for the object. We can think a class as a sketch of a parrot with labels. It contains all the detail like name, color, size of the parrot, and based on this description, and we have already studied about the parrot, and we have already seen parrot has attribute and a behavior. In parrot himself is an object. So first of all we want to make the class. So creating a class is really easy. So what you need to do is just type a class which is all in this lowercase, and let me just put a parrot over here. So just give the colon. After you just give the class name over here, you should provide this colon, otherwise it shows you a error. So first of all just create a class using this class keyword, and it should be all in lowercase, and the first letter in this class name should be always capital. So if you just put this parrot, it is not going to show you any error, but the naming convention is always with this uppercase. The first letter should be always the uppercase, or you can also see that is parrot, and you can just pass here class which can be your camel class over here. So I'll just simply stick to this parrot which is the name of our class, and I'll just say pass over here. So now we have created our class which is parrot class, which is an empty parrot class, and we have used this class keyword to define an empty class parrot. And from the class we can now create the instances. So instances is a specific object created for this particular class. So what if I say that is, I'll just create the object, and let me just give the object name as pop, and let me just create this object with this same class name. So first of all, in order to create the object, you have to give the object name. So in this case I have a pop, which is the name of a parrot, and the parrot name is pop, and I'll just give this assignment operator and call with this same parrot here. So in order to create the instance, you have to first provide the parenthesis over here. Now you have created this pop instances. So this is the instances. So basically instances is the object. So you have a pop, so you can create another instances that may be Jim. So Jim is another parrot name. So you have another parrot which is Jim. So this pop and Jim can be identical in terms of behavior. They can sing, they can dance, but the attribute can be different from one another. Pop can be in larger shape, or the name is basically the different, and name here is itself different, which is one of the attribute of this class. So you can see we make use of this object in order to reference to this class and make use of the attribute and the method of that class. Now let's furthermore create this parrot class. So first of all, what you need to do is, I'll just say species. So let me just create this species, which would be obviously my bird, which is our parrot. So this is our class attribute. So if you see here, we have made similar to that of variable. So we have done something like this: a equal 10 in the case of the functional programming, where we make use of the functions, and it is same as saying, but instead we have used this code which is species. So it is same as saying we are creating the variable, but we normally call it attribute in the case of object oriented programming. So next thing what you can do is, we'll just make a function. And the first function, just remember that the first function in any class is this init method. So it is really important to know. So init method is the constructor of our class. So constructor means the method that is going to be called itself when you just create the instances of the object. So when I just say pop, which was our object, so I'll just say parrot here, and we have just created the object of this class. So the method that is going to call when this pop is made, or when the pop is created, is only this init method. So when I just say self, which is obviously the reference to this pop, which is the current object. So if you have done ever coding in the Java, then you could see something that is this keyword in the case of Java, but in the case of Python we have something like a self. So self is saying that self is referring to this current class. So self is referring to this current class object. So you are just saying self means that is the parrot class. So self is always the default argument that should be put in this parrot method. So when I just create another method, let me just give you example over here. So let me just create another method over here inside this same class over here, and if I just say define, let me say singing. So first argument always in the method should always start with the self. So if you just remove this self and just made this function like this, or you just print over here, let me say print me singing, then it is going to show you an error. That means the first argument always should be self, and other argument are optional. If you just want to put any variable, that should be local, obviously, like we normally do in the case of functional programming. So first is always the self, and let me just assign name and age. So this init method is a constructor which is used for the initialization. That means we can initialize the variable of the class with this name and with this age. So what we did here, basically this self is current parrot. So what we did here was same as parrot dot. So we have made use of this parrot class in order to reference to this name and the age of this class. So it is same as saying we have here name and it is empty over here, and we have age which is also empty in this case, and we are just referencing this parrot which is obviously the self. Self is normally the parrot here. I've already said self is referencing to this parrot, so we normally use self in order to reference this class attribute, and it should be with this dot operator, and I'm just referencing this name of this parrot. So I'm just referencing this name of this parrot, and when you just create this parrot, I have to just put here pop. So it should be pop, which should be obviously this string, and next one would be age. Let me say 3 is the age of our parrot. So if you see here, pop is in this name. So I have already said you that self is a default argument. It need not to be initialized. Nothing should be passed in the case of a self, and the pop would be to this name and 3 would be to this age. So now we have a local variable that is name and age in this init method, that is this name and age. But this name and age is different from this name and age, because this name and this age is basically our class variable or class attribute, which is this name and age. So in order to reference this name and age, now what you need to do is you can only just reference with this self.name and self.age. What I really mean is, if I just go over here and let me just print this down, that is parrot. Let me just go over here again, and I'll just say parrot name is, and let me just format this, and age is, and format it again, and let me format it with the normal format function. And you know how to format, that is using this format method. And first will be just a name, and if you just pass name and age, it is going to show you error. So let me show you first. So if I just save this down, and let me just remove this self name and age, and you don't need to just specify that, and because it is a default, that is you are just creating a name and age here, and you are just assigning this name and age, which is pop and 3. So if I just save this code and run it, now you could see the error, that is name is not defined here. So name was basically this local variable. So outside this name you are not going to define. So let me just go over here and let me just make a print here, that is name, and let me just say it should be something like name. If I just go here, then if you just print, then it is saying name is not defined. Obviously this name was only this inside the init method. So when I just go over here, and now if I just print this down, you could see that is name is pop is here. Name pop is printed, but what has happened in this case? because this name is just restricted to this init method only. So this name and this age cannot be accessed outside this init method, and we know it because it has a local scope. It can't have a global scope. But this self.name and self.age is basically this class variable. So in order to access that, we have to just pass self.name and self.age. So this has a global scope now. So you can just reference this self.name and self.age in order to get this name as a pop and 3. Just go down here. So what we did here was we have to just go down here, and in order to do that, we have to define another method. Let me say info method, and in this info we're just going to print over here. So now it's time to just call this info method. In order to call this info method, what you need to do is you have to make use of this pop, which is object over here, and you give this dot operator, and you just call this info method over here, which is this method. You are just saying over here that is you are just creating this pop object using this class, and in order to reference this info method, you are just using this dot operator and using this object call or invoke this info method. So when I just save this down, and you could see now we have something that is the parrot name would be, let me just go over here again. So it should be over here, and let me just save this down. So we have an indentation problem over here. So let me just make a proper indentation, and let me save this down and run it again, and it is showing me one more time error. So that should be because we don't have put here self. Now when I make a proper indentation, then when I just press F5, then you could see parrot name is pop and age is 3, which is the message of this info method. So it is saying parrot name is the self.name. So if I just remove this self over here and remove this age, that is self dot, and if we could save this and run it one more time, then it is saying name is not defined because it has a local scope, which is this name, so it can't be used in the other method. So it is really important to know about this the way self works, and self is basically important argument. And if you just remove this self over here, and if we just save this down and run it one more time, then it is going to show you error that is info text 0 positional argument but 1 was given. So basically what you need to do is just to put a self in every method of this class. So when you just define another method, and let me just go over here again and define another method, let me say sing method, and if you just don't put any, that is the first argument is a self, then it is going to show you error. So that means you have to just put a self which is referencing to this current parrot class in every of this method that is defined in this parrot class or any class. So just remember that the first argument in any method would be the self, and the first method that is going to be the initializer. That means it is going to initialize your parrot or any class attribute over here. So if you have a car, and it is going to just initialize your name, which is basically the name of your car, with this name which you passed while creating this. Let me say Maruti. When I just say Maruti, then it is just creating with this car, and let me just give the name as Maruti, and the age, let me just say price here. So it should be price, and in this age I'll just say price, and it should be assigned price instead of age. And let me say car name is, and price is this. So you could simply format it with name, and you could simply format with price. So what you did here was creating the new object here, which is Maruti object. Let me just remove this one, and if you see here, what we did here was we make use of this car class. So let me just remove this one too, and we make this init method in order to just initialize the name and a price of our car, which is our car class. And here the first object will have this name as Maruti, and let me say $3,000. And if I just print this info, and you know how to call this info, that is using this Maruti obviously, and you just type here that is info, which is our method over here. And if you just do this, then you could see that we have a complete class over here. And if I just save this down and print with F5, then it is going to show you error, that is it is not showing because you are not giving here self dot. So I have already said you, in order to just reference to this class attribute, you have to just pass the self dot name and a self dot price. So let me run it one more time and save this first and press F5 in order to run, and it is saying car name is Maruti and price is 3000. So you could see how it is easier to reuse that code which was basically used in the case of a parrot. Now it is used in the case of car. So it provides the reusability in a minute. So it is really important to know this concept. So let's get back to our original code where we had something that is info for our parrot and we call this parrot. Let me save this down and show you error one more time, that is with this name and age. So let me just format with this self dot name and a self dot age. Let me save this down, which is with this age, and print with F5. Then you could see parrot name is pop and age is 3. So if I just say the another variable, let me say gym would be our object, that is new object, and it should be instantiated like this, and the first method while creating this object is going to be invoked this method. So you don't need to be called, so init method need not to be called like this. In the case of info we have to call with the object, but in the case of our constructor we don't have to call like this, that is init method need not to be called like this. It is the invoked method when you just created the object, but the make sure you just put a position argument in the place. So if I just say that is a gym, and the next one would be 2-year-old. So let me just call this info method with this gym object. So let me just print this down, save this down first and print this. Then it is saying parrot name is Jim and age is 2 over here, which is calling this same method but with a different attribute over here, and the attribute is name and age. As I have already said you that the attributes are always different, that in this case is Jim, age are always different, but the method they assess can be the same. That in this case is info is assessed by both of this object, which is pop and Jim, which is our parrot name. So we can also create the instances of the parrot class here, and we can assess this class attribute which is species. So let me show you another way in order to just use this attribute of the classes which is species. So that can be made using the class species method. So let me just go down here and let me just make use of that. So let me just go, let me say it should be over here. So I made the object, so I'll just print down something that is pop is, let me just say format it, and I'll say years old. So let me just say that is species. So because we want that species to be the bird, so I'll just say pop is this in order to format with this species. So we have another way in order to assess this species, which is the class attribute, using this statement, that is, let me just format it first, and that is the way to make use with this object, that is pop object. First you have to make use of this pop object and make use of this inbuilt class method. So what you need to do is you just pass this inbuilt class method like we have here in the case of init. You can make use of this double underscore class and double underscore, and you can just say that is species over here. Species should be the same name as here, which is our class attribute. So when you just go over here and close this down, let me just remove this gym for now. Let me save this down and run it one more time. Then you could see pop is bird. So this pop is bird is basically this statement, which is just using this class, which is basically to specify the species of this bird, which is bird. So it is just formatting with this bird over here. So it is just saying bird, and we are just saving this down and see that is pop is bird. So basically we are just getting this species attribute using this statement, which is basically the class species. So we can conclude that class attribute are same for all the instances of the class. Similarly, we can assess the instances attribute using this name and age over here, which is for the parrot. However, the instance attribute are different for every instances of the class, like we have here, that is for every instances the name and the age is different. You can also have the another attribute over over here. Let me say color. What is the color of our parrot? So that can be different. So one can have something like a let me say purple. So another would have something like, let me say green. So one can have the green, another can have white, any color of the parrot. So that can be the another color different, which is the attribute. So we can have a different attribute for the different instances. So just remember that. Now it's time to deal with the methods of our class. So we have just deal with this init method, that is basically our constructor. So now let's define another method over here. Let me say define me a sing method. So sing, I've already said. So sing method default argument will be self. As I've already said you, the first argument in any method of the class is going to be the self, and the song is basically the second argument here. So it will just return us, that is with formatting this, that is basically the song. So it will sing this song. Let me just format down with this format keyword. So it should be format, and it should be self.name over here, and it should be only the song. So if you wonder why didn't we just make use of this self.song over here, it is basically we don't have to just define this song as a class attribute. It is the song that can be passed while calling this object over here or while calling this sing. So if I just say, that is, if I have something like second song over here, so if you just have second song argument, and we can just format it with second song. So you don't need to have this, because this song is not in class attribute. Only class attributes should be assessed using this self, which is referring to this class. So we don't have second song over here. So let me just remove this down, and let me just remove this argument too. So now after just closing this return, so basically it is for the return. Now it's time to just call this sing method. So in order to call this method, all you need to do is simply call like this info. So what you need to do is, I'll just say pop.sing. So if you see here, as I've already said you, that the self is the default argument. It doesn't need to be passed anything over here. You don't need to say something like a self is current object, or let me say pop. It doesn't need to do something like this. All you need to do is to give this song. So let me just say the song over here, and let me just go back here and pass this song. Let me say song should be the string, and let me just give here song. So name of a song, let me say, so I'll just say rap god. So it is just singing us a rap god. So let me save this down. Then you could see our bird, which is self.name, in this case pop sings rap god. So let me save this down and press F5. Then we are not printing, obviously, so it is just returning, and we have to now print that. And let me just save this down again, and you could see that pop is sings a rap god, so which is basically this method over here, in which song is passed from here while calling this sing method. And if you just didn't pass this rap god, it is going to show you error, that is sing missing one required position argument, that is song. And if I just pass this rap god over here, and if I just say self.song, then save it this down and press F5, then it is saying parrot object doesn't have the attribute song. So if you see here, we doesn't have attribute song, and any attribute that is of the class should be initialized within this constructor. Just remember that. If you don't have a song over here, if I just have a song over here, let me say ting ting, any song, and if I save this down, then it is going to see pop sings ting ting, not this, that is rap god, which is basically this self.song is referring to this class attribute. So if I just remove this self.song, and if I remove this self, which is basically referring to this class attribute, and I am just referring to this local variable now, which is basically of this sing method. So if I save this down and run it again, then it will sing the rap god, which is basically the position argument that we have passed from here, which is the rap god. So this is basically the simple basic class which contains all the attribute that is to be defined within this constructor or initializer, and we have a bunch of functions in order to give the method. Just remember that all the function contains the default argument is self, which is the first argument. So if you just do something like song at first and self, if I just save this down and run it again, then it is saying str object has no attribute name, which is basically the error of this. So first argument always should be self, and the next would be your local variable over here. So let me save this down and show you that is Pop is singing the rap god. So basically this is the method of our class, and this is our attribute, and you can define multiple attribute with the help of initializer, and you need to create the object in order to use or in order to access the method of your parrot class. So this is the way in order to create the object, and in order to just make use of this method inside this parrot class or any of class, you just need to just call with this object and give the dot or a period, and you just need to call your method with this same signature. If you just say sing yes with capital, it is not going to work. So it is saying parrot has no attribute sing, so it should be the same name over here, that is all in small. So let me save this down and show you parrot is singing the rap god. So this will be the rap for this lecture. In the next lecture we'll just continue with the properties of the object oriented programming, which would be our inheritance and polymorphism. So see you in the next one.